Welcome to the Take Action podcast, where we empower communication partners to feel confident with AAC. I am Lauren Greenleaf, a certified speech-language pathologist with nearly a decade of experience in AAC. Join us weekly as we dive into all of the aspects of AAC and hear from communication partners just like you who are successfully integrating AAC into their daily lives. Whether you are an SLP, a parent, an educator, or any other communication partner, you are absolutely in the right place if you are ready to take actionable steps towards AAC success today. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Take Action podcast. I want to take a few minutes at the beginning of this episode to thank you for tuning in. It really means the world to me that you are here and listening and learning from so many other communication partners and myself as you navigate through your AAC journey. If you are brand new to the show, welcome, and I hope that you are able to find lots of value with the interviews that I do and the solo episodes that I do. I've really been so fortunate to interview so many amazing people this season, and I am really looking forward to what next year will hold. On that note, we do have a great lineup for the rest of this year. And then next year, we are working on planning. So if you are interested in being interviewed for the Take Action podcast, please send me an email or a message on Instagram and let me know what you would like to talk about. I also want to make sure you know you do not have to be an expert in the field. You don't have to be a speech therapist. You can be a parent. You can be an OT. You can be a music therapist, a teacher. The idea of this show is really to introduce you guys to other communication partners that are just like you listening, that are able to share what is working for them or challenges that they're having and things that they are working through. So if you are interested, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're going to get planning on the 2025 season really soon. So it would be great to have you on the podcast. And with that, let's talk a little bit about our solo episode. So today it is just me, and we're going to be talking about how we can navigate conversations around AAC. And this is something that has come up a lot for me lately. We've had a lot of messages come through about different topics. So maybe somebody is talking about grid size and they're trying to have a conversation with another team member about how they can navigate that discussion because they're getting a lot of pushback on trying to use a bigger grid size. Or I'm having conversations with professionals trying to introduce AAC within their school districts or within their teaching teams, and they're getting a lot of pushback on the type of AAC that's being introduced or the reason we're introducing AAC. So I really want to put an episode out there that kind of talks about how we can really have these conversations and how we can step back to better have these conversations. Because the most important thing that I want you to remember, and I'm going to put it at the beginning of the episode because I think it really sets the tone. No one out there has poor intentions for the individuals we are working with. And if they do, they are in the wrong field. And that is a challenge outside of this discussion on this podcast. But I want you to think about those individuals that maybe you're kind of having some challenge with, or you're not agreeing on certain things. It is likely that they want the same thing that you do. It's just your approach to get there is not the same. There are no people that I've ever met that are sitting there going, I really don't want this kid to talk because that would just be bad for everyone if they could communicate. And we know that's not true, right? People are not sitting there having these like really malicious thoughts about people's communication. Professionals, parents, others are out there saying, you know what, I really want to support this communication, but this is what I think and this is what you think. And when we understand that we're in it for the same thing, we're trying to get to a very similar end goal, I think we can have a little more compassion and a little more discussion about what that end goal is and how we can get there. I will also put this at the beginning of the episode too. When we are setting goals and we are using AAC and we are supporting AAC users, their priorities need to come before ours. If they are able to tell you that they want to work on something, that is not for us to say, oh, you know what, you don't need that yet. We'll go ahead and work on that later. No, 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 no. If they want to work on it, we are going to work on it and support it. This is their life. They have the autonomy to make those decisions. Now, I know a lot of you listening are working with kids that maybe aren't able to share that information with us yet, and we got to get creative about how we can figure that out. But we want to make sure that we are providing support around the things the AAC user needs, not ourselves. This isn't about us. It's just not. It's not about us. It's about the AAC user that we are supporting. So when we look at these conversations, when we look at these challenges that we're having with other team members, how can we really step back and be reflective and provide evidence and support for our thoughts, but also be understanding and open to hearing other people's opinions too? So when we think about this, what we're really looking at is people are either operating from like emotional connections or these really fixed mindsets, right? So when we're coming from an emotional context, we're likely looking at AAC as something that is very wonderful and exciting and the best thing ever, or we're looking at it from some more of those like cautious emotions. Maybe we're fearful of something, or maybe we have some concerns. And when we look at those things, those are really important to acknowledge, right? If somebody is coming to you with an idea that is different than yours, but it's based in a fear of having to learn something new, a fear of not necessarily being needed to support the individual anymore, a fear of not being able to keep up with future skills or not doing it right, or a fear of what the process is going to look like. There is a lot of deep emotion within those things, and we need to be understanding of that. We cannot go into these conversations and be like, you know what, you're wrong. I understand that you're fearful, but like, it's just not, that's not how it goes. That's not sympathetic. That's not empathetic. We're not supporting that individual in those conversations. So, what I want you to do is, I want you to be really considerate of that. Is their idea coming from an emotional place? Is it coming from somewhere? And is it coming from something? And that kind of leads us into this next idea of a fixed mindset, because often we're afraid of making the wrong choice. We're afraid of doing the wrong thing for our AAC users, getting it wrong and not getting it right. And that is when we move into this idea of these fixed mindsets. And when I'm referring to fixed mindsets, I'm thinking of things oftentimes like these myths that come out, right? That there are prerequisites, or that we need a small grid size, or that we have to learn one word at a time. These are perceived truths for that individual. They likely learned it from a class. They likely learned it from a respected professional. They likely learned it from a mentor or an experience that they went through. And this is really important to understand. Most people do not just come up with ideas and have ideas and that's just where they came from. Typically there is some type of event that occurred or some type of instruction that occurred, and we said, oh, this is to be true. We always start with a small grid size. And that person took that knowledge and utilized that knowledge for a really long time. And now you're coming in and saying, you know, it's actually really more beneficial to have a bigger grid size. And here's why. Now, this person who you're talking to has to challenge this truth that they've had. They're challenging this belief that has been ingrained in them for so many years, or they learned from somewhere. So we have to take a step back and realize that we have to acknowledge that as an individual, and we have to break away from that thinking and then accept too that we were wrong or maybe not right in every situation before we can really move to a new form of thinking. And just that piece in and of itself is really, really challenging. We don't want to be wrong. We don't want to get it wrong. But it's important for us as professionals and parents to understand that things change, new information comes out, new experiences are shared with the world, and we need to be willing to adjust what we do to support our individuals to meet those new positive changes. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're kind of going through the next part of kind of developing this conversation. There are these really set ideas that we have, these belief systems that we create, and they come from something. Maybe there was that one experience where we really did have to teach that kid one word after another word after another word, and they were successful. So now we are saying, you know what, that worked really well for so and so. Now we're going to do that for Johnny over here because it worked so well last time. But we have to remember in the process that all kids are different and all processes are going to be a little bit different. And it's important to acknowledge that and come at these things with a growth mindset. A lot of the conversations you're going to be having are not necessarily coming at it from a growth mindset and I want to learn and I want to be better and I want to do better. And that is not something you can change for a person. They have to want that and they have to make that shift in their mind to be able to do that. So I'm going to give you guys some ideas on how we can support this. And it really comes down to this idea of creating a conversation that kind of moves in a more favorable direction rather than you just kind of telling people what is right or what is wrong. You will have to acknowledge the people you work with. Whether you are a professional working with other professionals, you're a professional working with parents, when you're working with your professionals, you really got to step back and say, okay, what's going on here? What might be some of those limiting beliefs? Where are we getting tripped up? Why are we attaching so much to these ideas? And then how can we find this common ground where we do both want the same thing for this AAC user, and how can we get this? These are going to stir up triggering things for people. And I'm not asking you to become a counselor and have all these conversations really in depth with people. I really just want you to make sure that you're using that as a backdrop when you're having these conversations. These people are not trying to be mean to your AAC user. They are not trying to sabotage their development of language. They are doing what they think is right. And if you don't agree with it, that is totally fine. And I completely can appreciate that. But we have to find a way to work together, right? We are a team. We are supporting this AAC user together. We have to find a way to work together and uncover some of these limiting beliefs that are stopping us from getting on the same page. So let's look at some of these ideas. What can this conversation look like? So when we are thinking about these conversations, I'm thinking about conversations maybe like presenting grid size or presenting a device in general, or maybe presenting different vocabulary, focusing on core words versus fringe words, or focusing on phrases. The GLP discussion comes into play a lot here. Kind of how do we navigate this for potentially different language processing styles? So this conversation that I'm going to introduce to you is modified from a popular teaching format that is designed to be more dynamic and engaging for learning. And I think it applies really, really nicely to these conversations that we're having around AAC. And there are three main components, and you got to introduce them in this order. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the why. The next thing we're going to do is talk about the what. And then if necessary, we're going to talk about the how. So we're going why, what, how. So what does this look like? First of all, why? When we are having this why discussion, why are you making the recommendation that you are making? And I want you to get specific here. That's the key. We can't just say like, oh, I want Johnny to be a better communicator. No. We have to say, I want Johnny, or Johnny needs to be able to access communication faster so he can get his wants and needs met quickly. Johnny needs to be able to have access to this vocabulary so that he can share his wants and needs. We're laying the backdrop for why, and this typically is your common ground. Usually you guys are on the same page of what communication supports we want, what supports the child needs, what they want. How can we meet on our why? Why do we want this? And what specifically do we want? We can't just say, like, why I need him to have an AAC device because I need him to have another mode of communication. I want you to be even more specific, like what part of communication, what function is he having a hard time with, what words would be really beneficial. The more specific we get here, the more we realize that we are really looking at common things. And if you're not, this becomes really apparent right here in this very first part of the discussion, because if your goal is over here and everybody else's goal is on the other side, that's why you guys are having a disagreement on strategies, because you're not looking at the same end goal or looking at the next step. We want to make sure we're really clear about why. Why are we doing this? Why are we recommending this? And why do we think it's going to support this individual? Next, we want to move to the what. And the what is, what do we need to do to get there? So maybe my why was, we want Johnny to be able to access vocabulary really quickly so that he can participate in class, or so that he can share when there's an emergency. What do we need to do that? We need to use a bigger grid size so he can access his vocabulary faster without having to navigate between multiple pages. Do you see already how that discussion versus he needs to have a bigger grid size so he has access to more vocabulary? I said the same thing. The thought process is the same, but the first way we put it, when we really looked at why we need it so he can better participate in class. We need it so he can share emergencies with us. Then we go into what we need. What is going to help us get there? It allows for this greater look. Like, we are looking at the big picture of how we can genuinely support this communication. And now we're looking at what we need to do to get there. This is where you guys are likely going to disagree on the way you're going about it. So what I want you to do is, I want you to stop here when you do still disagree and figure out what it is that they think their idea is better and you think your idea is better. And then we're going to kind of navigate through that together. Like, this isn't a foolproof plan. Just because you present it this way does not mean everybody is going to be like, yeah, actually, Lauren, now that you said it that way, I'm on board. There are still going to be nuances to it, but I want you to be thinking of, what is this big picture that we agree on? Now, what can we do? And then this last step is how. How are we going to get there? And that is looking at the specific steps we need to do to make this happen. So maybe we have an example that looks more at modeling language on an AAC device. And our why is that we see that Lauren really wants to communicate with her friends. She keeps going up to them and like touching their back to try to like get their attention. And she's using a lot of nonverbal communication to interact with her peers. And we really want to support that peer interaction. So what do we need to do? We need to provide more social language on her AAC device. We need to provide things like, hey, do you want to play? Or how are you today? Or you look pretty. Comments and questions related to these social situations. That is what we want to do. We want to put that vocabulary in there. So how are we going to do it? That is when you can break this down step by step. So maybe we're saying her paraprofessional is going to model, can you play, every time that she walks up to a friend at playtime. Now we are going step by step. This is how we are going to get that vocabulary out there so that we can allow her more language for those social interactions that she appears to really, really want. So you can see how we almost work backwards, because typically where we start is saying something like, I need you to model, can you play? It's on the device under chat because I want her to be able to talk to friends. And although that does say the same thing, right, the message is different when you flip it around. When you talk about really why we're here to support, what we need to do to support it, and then the specific steps on how, we really, really help navigate all of this stuff better. So those are the 3 steps to this conversation. And I really, really hope that you can try these and navigate them and see how they work for you. This is not an end all be all. just because we put these 3 questions out there and this kind of script for you doesn't mean that it is going to help resolve all of your AAC problems with others. It is simply a guide, and I encourage you to make this guide work for you. But I also want you to be thinking about those bigger pictures we talked at the beginning. We know people want to help these kids. We know people want to help our AAC users. So, what can we do to get on the same page about helping them and how we can help them? Sometimes it's an easy answer, and sometimes it's genuinely just not an easy answer. And I wish in the deepest part of my heart that I could change that for all of you. I have had plenty of conversations that despite trying this method, we still have to work over and over and over at a specific challenge that we're disagreeing on. And that is okay. And I think all we can do is continue to try and continue to best support the AAC users that we are working with. So, with that, we are going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. I hope that you really enjoyed it. This actually was kind of a sneak peek into Module 3 of the AAC Essentials course that I have in my AAC support network. So if you are ever interested in that, the link is always in the show notes so that you can access it whenever you need it. It's just a group of SLPs and parents and other communication partners supporting their AAC users and navigating different conversations and topics that come up. So with that, we will see you next week for another interview on the Take Action podcast. Have a great day.